Yeah.
Welcome back to KLEAN Radio. We're in the studio tonight with my co-host, Andrew Spanswick, who's about to go to Britain England on Tuesday.
Yes, I'm going to Manchester, and then I'm going back up to Edinburgh, and then I'll be back.
Okay, one of these times, I heard they have amazing festivals in Edinburgh.
Edinburgh.
There's no G at the end?
It's pronounced Edinburgh.
Okay, I've heard they have amazing festivals there. Are you going to take me one of these times?
Yeah, well, the Fringe Festival, you just missed it. It was in August. So.
Oh, thanks for
Can you
so
take
next year.
Me too?
Everybody just wants to go.
Yeah,
I
want to go to Edinburgh.
So
but that's one of, and
yeah.
we're a show
it's
about...
Edinburgh's an amazing
Yeah.
city. It's a little hot, and then cold, and then hot, and then rainy. It's kind of a different climate, but it's beautiful city.
You should write a travel guide, I've realized. A travel tour guide. Of that would be like great. People want to look up Edinburgh.
Well, Edinburgh. The next thing I'm looking for, though, is Hungary. We're looking at Hungary as well.
I went to Budapest when it was still a communist country. I worked
Wow,
there.
so that was what?
Let's not talk about it.
1983.
Let's not. No, it wasn't 83.
But we're in the studio tonight with Jennifer Gimenez. We're in the studio tonight with Andrew. It is National Recovery Month.
But just to say, though, I'm going to Britain because we're looking at how harm reduction actually has not been working in Britain.
Oh, wow.
And how they're starting to look for alternative ways to do treatment. So,
by harm reduction, explain what that means to people.
Harm reduction means giving people like maintenance doses of methadone for the rest of their lives, or not necessarily a non-sobriety abstinence-based program. So they're looking at how to combine new medical models with social models like AA or other models. And AA is very unpopular in Britain because Britain's very secular, even though they're mostly the Anglican Church, and there's Catholics in the north. But it's just a whole nother deal.
So they hear the God thing, and they
have this belief in therapy, which we don't we have like individualized therapy. In Britain, they believe in therapeutic communities.
Okay.
Where there's like a group of people that all work together, different therapists and clients, and so. We're experimenting with different models. Hopefully, we're going to have a couple programs up and running probably in the next few months.
So they're for harm reduction, which is, in Vancouver, where they have those places where people.
Well, you tend to see harm reduction is fairly. It was started in Norway, I believe, but it's been very popular in Europe. It hasn't been popular at all in America. It became sort of known about and imported from Europe when there was a huge influx of high-grade heroin into Vancouver, which drained down into Portland and Seattle. And there were a huge number of heroin overdoses. And so out of desperation from like 20 junkies dying a day, they opened up needle exchanges and shooting galleries for people that were using. And that was the introduction of harm reduction sort of into the United States. There'd been other people like Pat Denning and a couple of people in New York that have sort of been, following academically or actually practicing. I think like Pat Denning in San Francisco, she's got an amazing practice, works very closely on an individual level with clients, working on a harm reduction model. And her goal is to reduce all what they call the externalities of addiction. So, trying to get people to moderate their use or not only use in safe places and try to figure out a way to get them. The goal is still to get people sober, hopefully. But if they're not going to get sober, how do you at least get them as safe as possible? That's a very controversial way of treating people.
But you're saying now in Britain they found it to be...
Well, they're just desperate. They're
right.
desperate because they have... third generation heroin addicts. It's and it's because their families maintain on methadone. They top up with heroin, which means they'll shoot heroin on top of the methadone so they can still get high.
I've been seeing a lot in patients doing that.
Yeah, topping up. It's very common.
Topping up. I didn't know it was called topping up. A lot of people are doing it right now. A lot of young people are doing it.
Yeah, because you can't get all the drugs and you get the methadone, or
But then they shoot both.
They shoot the heroin on top of the methadone so they can get high and they don't have to buy as many drugs. So.
Wow. You said desperation earlier, right now, when you were talking about that. I think that to go back to the rehab, these kids were desperate, and.
Right.
And I think that, like how you guys are doing this, and I love that about KLEAN, is that like you are allowing one person to come in and get a bed. Like not a lot of people sponsor, as it's called, and
or scholarship,
or scholarship people, and these people have tried, and I mean, I remember when I was getting sober, my trainer, poor guy, I love him, I got to make an amends to him, but like in 2000 and in 2003 or no, in 2004, he had started, I guess Dr. Drew at the time had some website, and it was before he was like this other guy, and he was emailing going, my client is really sick and needs help. And like, I wish I knew.
Dr. Drew help people? No, but
guys,
I'm joking. I'm
Drew,
joking.
Well, I like Dr. Drew.
I
got no
love
problem
I
with
said
Dr.
it.
Drew.
I
love Dr.
everybody.
Drew, and what he does is amazing.
I
just
know,
like
I know.
There's many doctors out there that do
Yes.
that. And I think, and he didn't, I'm sure overwhelmed with so many emails or whatever on the websites back in that day,
Right.
that I wish I knew that there was other resources back then.
Yeah, well, most of the rehabs I've worked at have scholarship to at least one person or something. But, I started as a clinical social worker 22 years ago. So I've been doing this for a while. And one of the reasons I had to learn the business of healthcare was because I realized that the public system alone wouldn't ever be able to provide any beds for people in a meaningful way. They've been moving more and more away from, funding treatment and more towards criminalization. So, in psychiatric hospitals, it's even worse. We went from a 90-day length of stay under insurance even to now 8 days.
I know.
So,
thank God they let me. Dr. Harasti was my main doctor at Las Encinas. He was like 90 days is my thing. And I'm so grateful that it was a lot longer than that, but it gave me that.
Yeah, I mean,
like a little bit of foundation, a little bit of clarity.
And the only reason that we've moved from a 90-day model to an 8-day model, KLEAN, our average length of stay is about 44 days. Mm-hmm. But in the psychiatric world, to an 8-day model is purely because of insurance.
Mm-hmm. I know.
By the way,
it's got nothing to do with anything other than money.
By the way, if you just tuned in, you're listening to KLEAN Radio. Give us a call at 888-539-2980. That's 888-539-2980. But that is a very interesting thing. Let's, do you think, you're going to England, you're going to try to set up these things, you're going all over actually to try to set up programs to help people. Mm-hmm. Do you think even in America right now, we still haven't dealt with alcoholism and mental illness and all of these things? Do you think a lot of it has to do when somebody gets diagnosed with cancer, nobody ever says to them, really? Do you sure you have it?
Well, one of the reasons though that I've been going around to different countries is not just because I really want to travel for 20 hours on an airplane, which I don't, but because it's very interesting to see how different cultures over time have integrated the idea of addiction or alcoholism into their culture.
Right.
And it's dramatically different. Even though there's all these universal truths about addiction and the abuse of drugs and alcohol, different cultures deal with it differently. And it's like I'm getting to actually see all these different treatment models and then pick parts that I think work the best.
Andrew, help me take it to Argentina, because for me and my families there's different parts of the country of Argentina are like, oh, she was in the hospital. Right. There's so much alcoholism there, and they don't see it. And I went to a meeting there, and it was like 4 people, and that was it. But nobody accepts alcoholism. Like, I'm trying to bring it into
Asian communities are even more difficult to deal with. We would have, when I had psychiatric hospitals back in the 90s throughout the Gulf South, we would actually have clients that were flown in from like Korea because the parents didn't want to admit that their daughter had a psychiatric problem. So,
I was at a dinner the other night in Malibu, in Nobu, Malibu, the one over the water, and I was with a lot of fancy people, and they were like, "Oh, so you work in treatment?" And they're like, "So I think it's for weak people. Like, I think you're just weak if you're an alcoholic. Do you really think it's a disease?"
Well,
And
they stepped out for a cigarette.
And and I just went, you know what? This is a place where I'm going to pick my battles, and I'm just going to be like, I totally understand what you're saying. And I just didn't want to get in the debate or the argument or the discussion over it, because I'd be wasting. I feel like when you're ignorant about it or you're just so closed-minded, it's pointless for me to try to get to you.
You could say the same thing about religion.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Everybody's open to their own opinion.
And I respect that.
And believe me, I get a lot of people writing me emails that are not so nice.
So do I.
That don't believe or understand what I do.
They wish me dead.
For the most part, I just tend to ignore them, except for when they become really libelous. But, it's hard. The part that's difficult for me personally, honestly, is helping so many people, and then being bound to confidentiality with clients I work with, and then getting attacked by people.
We won't mention any names,
right? But so it's an interesting world we live in where I'm actually not free to speak freely about what I do and how I do it, with particular clients, because we have a real need to keep things confidential for clients.
Which is one of the cool things actually about Rehab, is that because people obviously sign that they agree to be on TV, you're sort of able to really get into the thick of things.
You are, and there's some things that they protect these people. Like, there's certain things they will not talk about or show because it's so crucial to these people's private lives. Like, that's what I really love, and I honor about that. It's fascinating, like, knowing, like, I'm going, I have to bite my mouth, my tongue a lot for certain, people that I work with, and I would never betray that.
A lot of this, though, also, like we were talking about earlier with the whole, like, alcohol's for weak people, and it's like that lack of understanding of having, like, an addict in your family. I'm like, really? I mean, like, it used to be that, like with gay people, it was like, everybody has at least one gay person in their family somewhere, like a cousin or a second cousin. You go out far enough, you're going to get one. You know what I mean?
Right. I mean, especially
has issues.
By the way, if you just tuned in,
there's a lot more addiction than there is problems, and issues surrounding family, hatred and a lack of understanding about sexuality.
I know. When I was getting my new home, I was talking to the people, and they were like, "So, you're an alcoholic?" And I was like, I can't even get into this. Like, and I was being judged on my past. And
I think that addicts have a problem similar to people that are gay, where they have internalized homophobia, where they have self-hate about being gay. And addicts, from all the, anger and disgust and withdrawal of affection and on and on and on that they get from family members and close friends, as they disappoint them, as they, while they're actively addicted, leads to a lot of, when they get sober, then they internalize all of that negative feedback, and they get sort of a internalized self-hate for having been an addict. Mm-hmm. And that can set people up for relapsing.
That's a really hard one. I'm kind of grateful. I'm really grateful that I broke my anonymity on such a ginormous scale, because I'm like, it's Google it. It's all out there.
You're listening to KLEAN Radio Live. The number here is 888-539-2980. That's 888-539-2980. We're having a lively discussion tonight about a lot of things, but I think these are important, extremely important things to talk about. The American Medical Association of America, what do they say? 30% of Americans have some form of addiction. Right, so you're like what you were saying. It affects everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody's got somebody in their family that has been affected by this. But what is it that, extended family or something? But we have no problem looking at cancer as a disease. Mm-hmm. What is it that's still preventing? And I ask you this because you've been in this industry so long, and I know you're still baffled by this. What is preventing people from saying it's a mental illness?
I think that people are terrified of mental illness.
Right, because we were talking about this the other day.
I think.
I'm so glad you're talking about this.
If you look at any other, it used to be, believe it or not, that people thought that your life and who you were was in your heart. And there was, when they started coming up with ideas like heart transplants, there was a huge religious outcry that you couldn't take one heart and stick another heart in the person's body.
It was almost like your soul.
Because it was their soul, and it would take away who they were. And then they realized, it's not in your heart, it's in your brain. So, the same sort of hysteria is sort of still there. We as human beings do not really know where the soul is, as we call it, is, what makes us who we are. And a lot of people are very worried about the parts of them that they, if you start seeing something's wrong with your mind and who you are and what you identify yourself as a person, then you're questioning everything about who and what you are in your brain. Mm-hmm. And people don't want to say, hey, you know what? My brain might be broken.
Well,